All right, let's begin. Everybody get a seat and we'll start. I was reading a document, an article recently about, it was from the Association of Boxing Commission, and it was the rules. Some of these are pretty interesting. I thought it might be helpful, especially for the wives. You cannot hit with an open glove, the inside of the glove, the wrist, the backhand, or the side of the hand. You cannot hit below the belt, hold, trip, kick, headbutt, wrestle, bite, spit on, or push your opponent. You can't spit out your mouthpiece on purpose to get a rest. If you floor your opponent, you cannot hit him when he's on the canvas. It's not lawful to kick the living daylights out of your spouse in the night and then pretend to be snoring to be considered asleep. I made that last one up a little bit. So what about conflict? When you talk about Christian marriage, the fusses, the arguments that we have are, and this is generally speaking, I know that a marriage can get in more serious trouble, need more serious help, and this is not applicable. But for most of us in Christian marriages, when we argue, what we're arguing about often isn't what it's about. You know, you come home at the end of the day and you're stressed. And usually, if one of you has had a tough day and you're stressed out, and the other one is not, well, that can work out pretty good. But if you have those days when both of you are experiencing that, well, there could be an argument. So what I want to suggest is a list of things that we do, or rules, if you please, to fight fair. Let's put up the list. Number one, when you're angry, don't get the wrong address. Now, what I mean by that is this. My hardest time for stress, I think, is just before I leave in the morning. I don't know if any of you other guys are like this, but I've got my list in my mind before I go to work, and I'm already in that mode. I'm thinking about the appointments that I have and what I'm going to accomplish, and that's a challenging time for me. You come home sometimes and you are really bent out of shape, and it's not about her. It's not about your wife. What it's about is that your boss is breathing down your neck and you've got important things you've got to do tomorrow and you're not prepared for them, and you're just stressed. You're just under a lot of pressure, and you realize that you're taking it out on her. It's not her fault, but you start barbing her and saying things against her. And what do you do about that? Listen, first place, you know that you don't want to be treated like that. And Matthew 7 and verse 12 says you ought to treat people the way that you want to be treated. Of course, that's true. Here, look, this is the secret. The moment that you realize that that's what you're doing, you've got to say it. You've got to say to your wife or to your husband, look, wait a minute. Look, this is not about you. I am sorry. This is about me. It's about what I'm going through right now, but I have no right to take it out on you, and that's wrong. Would you forgive me for that? Immediately say it. There is no reason to let this grow into something that's between you, that's really between you. Just stop right then and admit that it's not about your wife. It's not about your husband. When you're angry, don't get the wrong address. Here's number 2. Don't pretend that you can read minds. You know, you really can't. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I think about verse 11, says, no man knows the things of a man save the spirit of man that is in him. And how do we do this? Well, I think there's a number of ways. You say, I know what you're thinking. Do you? Are you sure you do? Or how about this one? Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you. Really? Your husband, madam, cannot logically respond to what you're saying to him if you're playing this little mind game where he's just supposed to know. He's supposed to know what's going on. I asked Cindy if I could tell you this story. The other day, she was getting ready for Ladies' Night Out. That's what we call it. And they'll have a Bible study, and they'll have some food together, and all the women bring food. And so I was sitting at the table working on something, and she was over there scurrying about, getting ready to go. She was all ready, had her keys in her hand, and she went to the pantry and stood there, and she picked up a half-eaten bag of potato chips. And she said, who ate these potato chips I was taking to ladies' night out? I'm the only one in the house. I mean, where can I run? I'm the only one. And I said, well, it was me. But I said, well, Sandy, you know, the potato chips were in the pantry where we keep, food that we eat. That's where we keep food. And so we had a laugh over it. I didn't know that those were protected. And so there you are. Don't pretend that you can read minds. The biggest one, though, is that you may start an argument, have a fuss. You may start correcting him and just kind of letting him have it. And it's not about what you're saying. Did you ever do that? And did your spouse ever say to you, when finally it's revealed, wait a minute, that's what this is about? That's what all of this is about? Let's just be careful about it. When you have a quarrel of something that you need to talk about, be sure that you say what it's really about. And when you find out in your mind that you're fussing at your spouse and it's really not about her, it's about you, say it. Say it quick before this thing goes any farther. I'm so sorry. It's just about what I'm going through at work. It's about what I'm going through. I'm just under such pressure. It's me, not you. And please forgive me. Be sure you add that part. Here's number 3. Don't go digging up bones. What I mean by this one is this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, love suffers long and is kind, envies not, vaunts not itself, not puffed up, doesn't behave itself unseemly. Wow, that's great. He wasn't talking about marriage, but this is applicable to marriage. When you say to your wife or to your husband, I love you, this is what you ought to mean. I mean, in Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That Greek word is the same one that's in 1 Corinthians 13. What do you mean, love my wife? Love suffers long and is kind. Love envies not, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own, not easily provoked, thinks no evil. Now that think no evil is the one I want to focus on for a second. What it literally means is it's kind of a banking term, or it's used in banking, and it would mean to keep a ledger. I had a couple come to the office one day, and they were having some problems, and so I set them down together, and I said, now, who wants to start? Tell me what's going on. And so he said, well, I'll start, and he reached, I'm telling you exactly what happened. He reached in his pocket, and he pulled out this little book. And it was one of those diary kind of blank books, but he had entries in the book. And he said, on this date, May 27 at 2 o'clock, this is what she said. And it was something negative. And then he went to the next entry. On this date, at this time, here is what she said. Here is what she did. And you know what? We got down into that little ways, and I got it. And I thought, poor woman, are you kidding me? Can you imagine having that kind of tracking system made? Would you like that for your life? I mean, if you're a man or a woman, would you like that? And the answer is, well, of course not. Of course not. Digging up bones is that we get into a little fuss, a bit of a disagreement, and I feel like my case is weakening, and I need some more ammunition over here. It's a great temptation, and you can do it because you're married, and so you know that person very, very well. I know her weaknesses. I know the wrong things that she's done in her life. I got all of that. I know those things. And it's just so easy to reach back into the past. Well, maybe I did that. But you know what you did was worse. And it's like I'm reaching back and picking up a stick and pow, gotcha. Huh? Because I reached back into history. I can think of something you did worse than that. So you're worse than me, and therefore I win this argument. Right? Okay, we're making some rules. I don't want to be treated like that. I don't. And Ephesians 4:32 says, be kind one to another. That is the opposite of kindness. There are things of my past of which I'm ashamed, days that I wish I could relive because I would do them differently. Is that true about you? Are there days that you would do differently if you could relive them? And the answer in everybody in this room is of course. But I cannot. Things that I've apologized for, things that I have been forgiven for, but now we're in an argument, and maybe the gloves come off. because what I want to do right now is because I'm mad. I'm just mad. And I need some more ammunition, so I reach back into the past. Now, let me quickly ask this question. Is there a time when it's appropriate with your spouse to bring up history? Yes. Yes. But it's not in an argument. It's not like this. The criteria would be when a particular behavior was sinful and it was pattern. When this is something that is a pattern. If you have, if it's alcohol, if it's temper and abuse, if it is pornography, if it's womanizing, whatever it happens to, those kinds of things, if it's a repeated behavior, and you can think of other examples, then what I want to suggest that you do is not wait for a time when you're arguing and then you bring it up. Don't do that. That's not going to be productive. What you do is that you find a calm time and you bring him a cup of coffee and you sit down and you say, I have something I want to talk to you about. Can we work on this together? There might not be a perfect time. It's going to be uncomfortable, but find the time and sit down and say, this is a reoccurring problem. And so what can we do? Maybe I can make some suggestions. Can we work on this together? That's an appropriate time to bring up sins of the past, but only if it's a pattern of behavior. One more thing before we leave this one. A great blessing of love and a great way to express love to your spouse. When he or she does something that's wrong, if it's in you, back to 1 Corinthians 13, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. It's a wonderful thing to say to your spouse when he or she apologizes, I'm sorry I did that, or I'm sorry I said that. To be able to say, it's okay. That's not who you are. I know that's an exception to who you are. That's not who you really are, and I know that, and I love you for who you are. That's a sweet gift. I want that kind of consideration. I want my wife to look at me that way, to say, oh, you messed up, but that's inconsistent with who you are, and I know who you really are, and I love you. Well, you know what? That puts us back. All right, don't go digging up bones. Rule number 4, never lie to enhance your assertions. Do we do this? Oh, yeah. The way that it works is sometimes, well, I'll tell you what you said. I remember what you said, and then we sort of embellish it. We may even quote it, but we'll say it in a bigger way. You said, and it takes on a whole different meaning. Do you ever say it to your spouse in a fuss to say, wow, I wish we had a recording. I'd like to play it back what you really said or what I really said. What's happening? Well, I'm exaggerating in order to enhance my position. Don't lie. Don't lie to enhance your assertions when you have an argument. Always say it just like it really is and try to deal with it exactly the way it is. Exaggeration is a form of lying, isn't it? And we might say, you always do this. It's not really true. Or you never do this. Matthew 5 and about verse 37, and Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything that's more of this comes to evil. Proverb 31, about a virtuous woman, the heart of her husband does safely trust in her. You make sure that's true with this rule. If you have a tiff, if you have a disagreement, if you have an argument, if you have a fuss, never lie to enhance your assertions. Always be sure, even if you're upset, to maintain your honesty, your integrity about everything. Treat that husband, treat that wife with fairness. Don't let this go over your head. Number 5, leave my mother out of this. So, again, Ephesians 4 and 32 talks about kindness. And sometimes when we get angry, it's kind of like road rage. You're apt to do something, say something that you wouldn't normally say. You ever do that? Did you ever do that? Because you're mad. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you and I are responsible for our actions, whether or not we're angry. We're responsible for our words, even if we're mad, aren't we? When I get to this point where, you say, it's like, I don't want to just insult you. I want to insult your family too. Okay, so I'm not satisfied with just you. And so you're just like your mother. You're just like your father. It's like he had some negative characteristics, and I see them in you. And the point is that I'm not really interested when I get to that level. I'm not interested in fixing this, whatever it is. What I want to do is draw more blood. That's what. The rule is, leave your mother out of this. Leave her mother, leave his father. What good is that? Don't say that. Leave that alone, because it comes to no good. What's he going to say? What's she going to say to that? All that does is to drive this fuss into a deeper realm. Leave my mother out of this. Rule number 6, never say the D word. I don't mean damn. I mean divorce. And if you ever have, if you've ever let a fuss, an argument get to this point, then you need to, today, look your spouse in the eye and say, I am so sorry I ever used that word. Will you forgive me? I didn't mean it, and I vow to you I will never use that word again in reference to our marriage. I never will. That's a real dangerous thing, you know. If I were the devil, what I would do is to take things like that and to try to grow them, water them, these plants. You say, I'm going to tell you something. I have half a mind to go out that door and never... Don't say that. Don't say that. Or, look, I've already researched this. I've got a lawyer. I know a name of a lawyer and a number, and I will... So the problem with that is that Satan will take that and he will try to enhance that and grow that inside of you. Just don't cross that line. And if you have crossed that line, today, I want you to apologize. Today, say, I vow I will never do that again. It isn't your love that sustains your marriage. It's your marriage, that commitment, that vow that sustains your love. Number 7, keep this between us. Now, I'm a believer in sometimes bringing a third person into this discussion. I don't think there's any shame attached to that, to having some counseling. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, naturally I wouldn't, but sometimes counseling not only gives you this objective perspective. I'm not involved in this. I don't have a dog in this hunt. And then you listen to it and you say, well, this is what Scripture would tell us to do. This is the right direction, and here's how we can accomplish this. But it also affords some accountability, because there's one more person involved who will sort of hold you accountable. So can y'all come back and let's visit again in a couple of weeks, and we'll see how things are going. And so it makes both parties want to do better because we're going to go back and have this accountability. The problem is that you have kids, you start having an argument, and I can tell you right now that if you're not careful, you can get mad enough that you don't care if the kids are listening. You can get angry enough that you just don't care. It's like lobbing a bomb into that living room, and collateral damage right then doesn't matter to you. What matters to you is getting it said. I'm going to say it. But that's a terrible thing right there. Sometimes I'm convinced that a spouse, maybe a wife, will say things that are really ugly to a husband in front of the kids because she thinks he's not going to retaliate because the kids are here, so I can get him now, right? But what happens with kids, and by the way, the rule is you should never, ever, 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 ever argue around your kids. Just don't do it. Take it somewhere else. Don't do it. First place, because you're going to hurt those kids, those children. You don't want to hurt them at a deep, deep level. I have a good friend right now. I eat lunch with him about once a week or more, and he's a member of the church. He's in his late 30s now, and they've been married. And he's average or a little above average looking. He's physically fit. He's got a responsible job. He makes decent money. He has a house and a couple of rentals. He's doing well, and all of those things. I don't think he'll ever get married. And the thing is, he really wants to be married. He just desperately wants to have a wife. And it's not that he can't find a woman who's interested in him. But once a woman shows him interest, he's going to do something to mess it up every time. He just pushes her away. And I know why. And because I'm close to him. We've talked about this a lot, and the problem is that he grew up in a house where there was so much fighting, so much, and even physical abuse sometimes, and it was so bad, and they finally divorced, and he was hurt at a level, and I know this is an egregious example. I'm giving you a big example of this, and so a lot of us minimize from this, but in his case, I don't think he can do it. I think that psychologically he's just so scared that he will go back to that tormenting place if he marries somebody. So he's always in conflict, and I have great pity for his circumstance. Don't argue in front of your kids. Don't do that. You may hurt them at a place that you can't go back to and fix. Don't do that. And furthermore, aren't your children right now watching you, and aren't they, in a sense, in a school for how you do marriage? Aren't they doing that? They're learning right now. Isn't it true that I think that we grew up feeling that and even as adults, that we have permission to do what our parents did. Even some things that are wrong. Your children are learning how to do this marriage thing, and so don't argue in front of them. I would say that there are times when you would call a friend and talk over an argument that you've had with your spouse. You just be very careful with that. You be very careful, because once you fix the problem, if some ugly things have been done and you've told it, then you have to be sure that you cover that ground again and now say, but we fixed it now and everything is good. You've got to make sure you fix that. I don't like at all for a man to come home, they've had an argument at the beginning of the day, and he comes home to his wife in the evening, and he's gotten over it, he wants to apologize and make things right, and he comes in the house and she's on the phone with her mother, and he walks in and she's saying, yeah, and I'll tell you what he said next. Yeah, well, I was mad. I'm still mad. And then I told him this, and I told him this, and then he said this. And suddenly, you've compromised that little leave father and mother thing. So I'm just being cautious. Be careful about who you talk to. It's not a bad thing to talk to somebody when you have conflict and you're having arguments. Just be sure you're careful about who you talk to, and don't do that willy-nilly. You find the person who you can trust and who will be balanced, not simply somebody who's going to jump on your side quick, but somebody who will be objective and who loves you enough and has a balanced enough mind and logic, who will say, sometimes I don't think you're doing right by him, or I don't think you're doing right by her. This is not good. You're the one who needs to change. All right? So rule number 7 is keep this between us. Here's number 8. Avoid paybacks. So in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said that we should turn the other cheek. Somebody smites you on your cheek, turn the other cheek. Now, the principle there is not that we're to be doormats if we're Christians, disciples of Jesus, but it does mean that we're different in this regard. This is so very hard. This is not for cowards. I'm not to practice retaliation. In your marriage right now, I expect that there are times when something is said or something that is done that bothers you, but that you could let go. Do we have to respond to everything? Do we have to respond in kind to everything? I don't think so. And sometimes things grow, big things grow out of little things. I like to collect antique clocks. I've been doing it ever since we got married. We started life together. Really, the first one, we still have it. The first antique clock that we own, I bought for Cindy for a Christmas present. At least that's what I told her. And it's become a great hobby, and I enjoy restoring the movements and all of that. And so it's kind of unusual, but I like it very much. And sometimes Cindy and I will enjoy going to an estate auction. Not very much, not once a year, but once in a blue moon, we'll go to an estate auction, which is just a lot of fun, especially if they have an antique clock that has come down through that family. And so we'll get there, and Cindy, did you see that clock? Oh, I'm going to buy that clock. Now these days, I'm older now, and so a clock has to be pretty special, and it has to be a price that I can afford before I'm really interested anymore in one. But, did you see, you know what? That clock's worth $150, and I'm going to pay it and buy it. That's what I'm going to do. And so you know how that auction is, and you know why people have auctions instead of yard sales, and you get that fever going, and In Tennessee, they have such talented auctioneers, and he gets to rolling and he kind of sings it. And you look at your clock, it's coming closer. He kind of selling things, and finally that gets on the table, and he says, I'll give $100, and I got 100, and then 125, and it goes back and forth. And then this inconsiderate woman over here offers $150 for my clock. And when it comes to the end, the hammer drops, and I paid $225 for that clock. And you say, but Glenn, didn't you just say it was worth $150? Well, yeah, but I got caught up in the auction and I just bid too high. That's what happened. And that's how come people have auctions, is that you're apt to do that. So he comes home in the evening and she's there and he's had a rough day. And so he's just short with her. The problem is that she has PMS. And so she responds in kind to that. She's short with him too. And he says something ugly, and she says something ugly right back, and he says something a little uglier, and so it starts to ratchet up. And finally, after a few minutes, he says something awful to her. And the room gets quiet, and she says, you've been thinking that all along. And the truth is, he hasn't. He just got wrapped up in the auction, and he bid too high. He got wrapped up in the fever of the moment. So, avoid paybacks. Ask yourself this question: aren't there times when I could let it go? Am I the person who feels like I have to retaliate every time something seems a little off to me? Do I always have to do that? Or could I let it go in view of the fact that if I just let that, you know what? She probably didn't mean anything by that. I'm going to let it go. Because if I do, we're going to have a better afternoon. We'll have a better evening. Fight fair. Rule number 9. Incidentally, that's how I'd like to be treated. And so that's how I want to treat Mrs. Colley. Number 9, don't manipulate with sex. In our next session, and we're going to take a break in just a few minutes, but in our next session, we're going to talk about the intimacy of marriage. And I'll just give you this point. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and it says that, and I'm paraphrasing, that when you marry, you give your sexuality to your spouse. Your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to him. Your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to her. And it never was meant to be manipulative. I had a friend a few years ago, not a member of the church, but a very kind man, and one day he said, "Oh, Glenn, I'm having trouble in my marriage." "I'm sorry. What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, we're just fighting all the time." And he said, and last night we went to the mall, went to this dress store, and she went over to this rack and found this very expensive dress. And she held it out to me and she said, "If you'll buy this for me, I will." Well, at that point, he was just so depressed and so down. And he responded, "Ma'am, there's a word for that." Now, they divorced. They didn't make it. And that's for a lot of reasons. It's not just about the dress, and the dress was kind of the tip of the iceberg. But the point I want to make is this. Sex is not ever to be used for a pry bar. It's to be used for an enhancement. Your body doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to your spouse. And then the passage goes on in 1 Corinthians 7 to say, don't defraud one the other, except it be with consent for a season, that you give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and then you come together again. God didn't intend for us to be apart for long periods of time. And I'm going to develop that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but the idea that sex would be used as a manipulation is a frightening and wrong concept. And typically, of course, it would be used, not always, but by a wife who wants to gain some advantage. I say that because very often the husband has a greater sex drive than the wife, and maybe she could get her way, but she pays a price for that because she's diminished their relationship. When sex is used as a manipulation, it will diminish the quality of that marriage. The better way, the right way to view it is that intimacy may be very uncomfortable for me if we're having a fuss, but that's off the table. It's not something that can be used for manipulation. It's not something that can be used for a pry bar. Don't manipulate with sex. And here's the last one, number 10, simplify your sorries. Wow, this one's big. And it goes like this. We have a fuss. I said some things I shouldn't have said, and so it's time that I want to apologize. And I say, look, honey, I'm sorry I said that to you. That wasn't right. I'm sorry. And then I start the mitigating arguments. But you always push my buttons, and what you said make me so mad. And so then we start, you know what, that's a cheap apology. You could turn that apology over on the bottom. It says made in Hong Kong. Don't offer cheap apologies. That's no good. Don't offer mitigating circumstances. If you're not ready to apologize, then hold it until you are. I want you to practice, ready for this? Practice good apologies. And a good apology just says it, asks for forgiveness, and you don't argue any mitigating circumstances. Well, wouldn't you say in the Bible the best one is probably Luke chapter 15, the prodigal coming home to his father. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you or in your sight. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. How much of that is arguing, yeah, but my brother is a sorry rascal? Well, none. How much of that is, yeah, but you're always so restraining to me. You won't let me do it. How much of that's in there? Well, none. It's just an apology. I want to suggest to you that in fighting fair, and you know that I'm using that word fight in quotes, I don't mean it. But when you argue, be sure that you apologize as quickly as you can. And when you do, make it a high-quality apology. Make it good. Would you bow with me, please? Father, we thank you for the time that we're able to spend together and for this session to talk about uncomfortable times in our marriages. We pray, Father, that you will help us to humble ourselves, to see things as they really are, to acknowledge our own faults in the areas in which we need improvement. Help us, Father, to navigate our way through the uncomfortable times so that we can get back to enjoying one another the way that we should. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, let's take another break, and then we'll come back together and we'll take up with our last session. Glad you're here.